Welcome to What Do You Know podcasts. This podcast was created to inspire, to open up those sparks and invite us to what do we each know. Now, my guests come from all around the globe, have experienced, have created, and brought different things into this beautiful world. But what if their journey is just there to be an inspiration for what it is that each of us actually knows? Some of our topics will be about the planet, businesses, money, creation of wealth, relationships, and so much more. And we invite you to listen to this episode of What Do You Know? Hello, everybody, and welcome to What Do You Know podcast. My name is Lale Hancock, and today our special guest from Northeast America, Kate Sarton. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me, Lale.
Well, you guys are going to find out a little bit more about Kate because she's this multitasking magician, happens to live in one of the most beautiful spots in the US. But I'm sure she'll tell us all about that. And today, I'm curious what we're going to talk about. One of the topics is to create beyond competition. So, Kate, the floor is all yours.
Amazing. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree that the state of Maine in the United States is one of the most beautiful places. And funny side story, when I originally moved up here, it was just transition. I had no plans of staying here. It was like, okay, I'm coming up. I'm like resetting my life and figuring out what I want to do. And then I was like, oh, it's so beautiful here. I'm, I'm staying and then I'll travel. Yeah, and I love what you said about multitasking magician because it's like there's the literal doing of multitasking on like projects and different things, but I also feel like my skill set is very interesting where it's all over the place. From like having my bachelor's in cinema production to massage and stress management to like team coordination, project coordination. It's like this very vast thing. And it always feels like the $1 million question when someone asks me, like, so what do you do? And I'm like, how do I distill all the things into, a business card or an elevator pitch?
Yeah. Well, in addition to that, you could say, on the Kennedy campaign as well. That added
Yeah.
to your.
True. And that was so funny because that was not like anywhere in my world that I thought I would get political in any way. And I'd been following him for many, many years. And so when he originally announced his candidacy, I was so excited because he's been, I mean, we could say like fighting the good fight. Like he's been doing that for a very long time of holding corporations accountable, holding people accountable from local to global levels. And he has this incredible knack of like looking at the big picture and getting people together to work together. And is able to look at really complicated situations from multiple directions. He doesn't simplify it to like this binary either or yes, no, black or white situation. So I had been following him for a long time. And then when he announced, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so exciting. And then I just kind of like stumbled into all of it and then was helping contribute along the way. And it was such a gift. A lot of it shifted now because of the way that the campaign has gone. And what a surprising and unexpected gift that like really offered me so many amazing things.
Well, I think that opens the door of the conversation for our topic as well, because so often most people define competition as, I don't know, let's ask you, what is or what was your definition of competition?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I necessarily had a definition. But I would say that competition was a huge motivator for me. I grew up playing competitive sports. I grew up with a very intelligent family, so grades were a big deal. Um, and so I obviously adopted a lot of that into my outlook of the world and how I engaged with things. And I always had, not that I was trying to be unkind or anything, but I always had competition as kind of a guiding factor, a North Star in motivating myself, even if it was just me with myself, of like how to get better, how to aim higher and go. And what got really quickly interlaced with that was also like perfectionism, this like, it can always get better. Um, and so with that, with those two things, what was really fascinating for me as I've been like walking through this and kind of exploring it of like what's possible beyond it, because neither of those things were really working for me anymore. Um, but I started to see that with both of those things, the competition with self, competition with others, and perfectionism, it all required constant judgment of myself, constant comparison to other people. And it just wasn't fun. I started to see like all of these really crunchy places, and it had just kind of been autopilot before. And then I started to see these crunchy places, and I was like, oh, like there has to be something else that's possible beyond this. And so, I mean, maybe some way that people look at competition is like there is a winner. Like there's always a calibration, a hierarchy scale in some way, whether it's within work or it's within a sports team or it's, you know, with a friend group or whatever. There's always this comparison of who's doing what and who's doing what better. Um, and it's not that I'm not saying that any of that is wrong. What I just discovered for myself was that I was desiring something different than that. Like I'd been doing that for many, many years. And I consider myself a kind person. Like I genuinely care about people. I'm curious about them. So it wasn't even that I was this like cutthroat competition person, like pushing people out of the way, knocking them down. But I just discovered it was this foundational way that I was interfacing with my life, and it wasn't really fun anymore.
Yeah. And you know, the latest conversation we're having is about autonomy, you know, because we learned. I mean, I know personally for me, I was the middle child, you know, but like it was like I was the one who had to, you know, fix what the older sister had done and then set the sail for the younger sister. And
Mm,
when you talked about competition, we'll come back to autonomy. Like the interesting thing for me with competition, I didn't know all of what you just described, right? It wasn't cognitive in my awareness that I wasn't even functioning from that. For me, competition was what was a competition in the corporate world for me. And it was like, oh, other people are doing that. There's other products in the world that are doing this. So for me, competition was never the cutthroat, you know, kill the other, do it 10% cheaper. It wasn't from that mindset. It was more from the creativity of something that hasn't been discovered yet. And it did
mm,
inspire me. It did gift it. Like I remember in so many of our meetings, I mean, I was in corporate America for, you know, most of my life. And it was never about that, other than it was like, oh my God, guys, we have a new playground. We haven't even
mm,
discovered yet. But it wasn't about copycat. It was that now we know that exists, and it wasn't even about out creating it. It was like, okay, we haven't even considered these other capacities. Ooh, what can we create? You know, what can we put out in the world? So for me, it's been really interesting to also see the layers of that, you know, like
yeah,
perfectionism for sure, you know, and also recognizing how much as a kid it wasn't my world, but it
mm,
was to please others, to make
yeah.
others happy, which I didn't know was impossible back then. You know, so it was more like you described, it's not just one thing, because competition by itself is a word, and it's how, what do we tie to it? What are the energies? What are the definitions? What are our points of views about it that end up being the sticky of what we're talking about? Because we have to also
Mhm,
be willing to compete. We have to be willing to be every energy so we're not blindsided, right?
mhm,
But it's like, what are we choosing? And now maybe I can bring in, you know, the latest topic is autonomy. And, you know, autonomy was like what we seeked for. Oh my God, I'm independent. I can do things without having to ask for help, or, not realizing it actually is the opposite. It's putting us in a box, a- away from contribution from nature, from ourselves, from the universe. And it's there to separate. It's not there to actually give you more power, give you more strength, and be at the leading edge.
Yeah, well, I think so many of us are not really shown how to acknowledge and like own our potency and capacities, like to just know that. And so then we're so often like pinging off of other things to prove in some way that we are good at something. And this is going to seem maybe a little bit from left field for a second, but that piece of like, I can do it myself, like that, like individualistic, especially like independent woman kind of thing. Like there
Oh,
was a time where I would almost be like, if someone held a door for me, like I could have done that. Like that was
yeah.
the insanity of how much I was relying on external factors to like prove that I could do things in the world. But the truth is, I can know that I can open a door for myself. And I can also be grateful for the kindness of someone thinking, like being aware of me and being like, hey, I'll hold this for you. Like it doesn't invalidate the potency.
Totally, totally. And how this topic came about is you were on a project and you're still on that project, and you want to talk a little bit about that. Like, that's what intrigued me to say, hey, let's play on the podcast because there's so much information there. I'll just let you
Yeah. So one of like the greatest gifts in my life is that I get to create with the massive I- it doesn't even feel right to call it a personal development company because it's so much more than that. But I have the gift to create with Access Consciousness. And so I literally get to create with people all around the world on different like awareness campaigns, classes. Like there are so many different things that we do. And I've said to other people that team creation, project creation is one of like the greatest facilitators for showing us our edges, revealing to us our capacities, inviting us to stretch. Like it, talk about a playground, like you were referencing with work. Like it is just this playground to explore so many different things. And so one of the things that I discovered was there was another woman who was creating on classes and things too. And I found myself like getting jealous of what she was choosing and creating. But like our engagement, I really enjoyed her. So it wasn't like, she was this unkind person. Like I genuinely enjoyed her. But then I also saw these triggers coming up, and it was like, wow. I was like, kind of what I was talking about with competition. It just got to a point where it was like, this is not fun and this is not working for me. Like, I am aware that something else is possible here. And so I sat with it for a second and was like, okay, what can I choose here that like is the algorithm interrupt to this pattern that's occurring? And again, it's not just about her. She's just the example of something that I've experienced in other places, and I know through conversations with other people that they've experienced things too, where we see someone shining, creating, and then we like reverberate it back against ourselves in
share.
judgment instead of it being inspiring. And so I sat with it for a second. It was like, okay, what can I choose here? And the thing that whispered in was, "Celebrate her." And I was like, "Oh," and like my body relaxed. And I was like, okay, every time I see something that she's choosing, every time I have a conversation with her and she's like sharing it, or I see a social media post, where she's got her beautiful photos up of traveling and classes and stuff, I was like, I am going to choose to celebrate her. Like that's going to be where I go first. And it changed everything because it was no longer about like her versus me or comparison of who was doing what better on like whatever imaginary scale of like consciousness and self-growth that I had running in my perfectionist brain.
Yeah.
It just became about like, wow, look what she's doing. And that like celebrating her then opened the space to let her be an inspiration. and let me sit in like, okay, and then what would I like to choose and create? And what is that for me? And then the next little layer of this is her and I were on a call together and she had asked a question and was receiving facilitation. And some of these dynamics were kind of there in the question and the facilitation. And I was like, huh, I got off that call and I was like, I'm going to tell her. Like I had never said anything, I hadn't revealed
Yeah.
that vulnerably to her. And so I left her this audio saying exactly what I, just summarized. And what was so wild is her response was like, one, oh my God, thank you. And two, I've been doing the same thing. Like it
Yeah.
was, and it melted everything to just be that together. And again, I want to loop back around to what you were talking about with your engagement with competition. That to me is like the creation and inspiration of competition where you're like, what's next? What else? And that. And it was like that what was able to spring forth when the other like comparison judgment competition was pulled away.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm actually in Costa Rica at a beautiful property. I'll show you guys videos on another format. Um, and we were here for a 6-day event, and we come and we could talk about any topic, but it really is about not my foot hurts, I have a problem, but it's like, hey, how do we make ourselves greater? And what contribution can we be to the planet and the universe? It's like a different advanced conversations that take place. And one of the things that we talked a lot about is, how much in certain situations, right? Like in this situation when you saw her, whatever she was creating, it's like that's a moment of choice, like that moment we can actually turn up the knob and turn us up, or that's the moment we can turn down the knob and turn us down.
Yeah.
And most of the time people don't choose to turn it up and celebrate what they're being and say, yeah, I'll have that too. Because what we don't recognize is that when you see something in someone, you cannot see it unless it's inside of you, unless you're being that already, but maybe you don't know it cognitively, you know? That's why there's so many moments, work or personal lives, we have situations that come up that are like, oh my gosh, I've never handled this before, I don't even know what to do. But that's some moment that you get to either relax and say, okay, what are the options here? What else is possible I haven't even considered, to open that door to explore, to step up. Or you can shrink to become a turtle, which sometimes is not fun. I mean, for the most time for me, I don't like being the turtle. Shrinking is not fun for me or my body, but I've done it. In so many situations, we don't want to make someone else feel bad, or we want to put them on a pedestal, but that actually isn't what's going to create greater. That moment you celebrate, that moment you're willing to say, I'm going to have that too, you actually now become that space of invitation and inspiration that can outcreate, that can be the leapfrog. And we continue to grow. Each of us grows our own way, but we get to now expand the universe and have even more possibilities. So I really would like to invite people, as you guys are listening to this, what are those moments in your life you did turn it up? And what got created? What became available? And those moments that you didn't, it's not wrong, but you chose that. So the next time, what else can you choose? What other options are now available you haven't considered yet? So I wonder, Kate, it's so beautiful to have watched your transformation, because you shared this on another call we were on, and how quickly you made that shift. It wasn't like you sat in it for weeks and months and years and
Right.
revenge and all of that. But I want to bring back this autonomy conversation. There's so much more about autonomy available in so many different access classes. If you guys would like to learn more, I actually have a class coming up that you can explore too. But this thing about autonomy is that moment of what doesn't feel good in your body. That revenge, how long did it feel good? 1 second? And then what? Because when we go against our own knowing, our own bodies, it doesn't feel so good. So I'm
Yeah.
curious if we went the opposite of autonomy is oneness, having communion with everything, not judging anything, which is really what true consciousness is, the inclusion of everything and the judgment of nothing, which includes us. That means not judging ourselves.
I love so much that you brought the body into this conversation because it is so true. My body has been such an incredible, like, hey, when I'm choosing something interesting, she is right there whispering, sometimes yelling, and being like, hey, let's look at this.
Yeah.
And it's such a gift. It is such a gift. And like you said, with the dial up and the dial down, I love that you shared that too, because when we're in that moment of choice and we choose the dial up, we make the choice that then changes the energy, it then becomes a part of you and moves with you forward. And so, like you said, it wasn't like I sat with it for a really long time and had to figure anything out. It was as simple as like, what choice can I make right now? But then
Yeah.
that changed how I could be on teams moving forward completely because it was no longer about the petty tallying of like who's doing what and all of that. It was like, oh, I can be with these people and ask questions. And of course I can move stuff and do all the things. But then I get to be this energy with everyone that invites them to come along for the ride too.
Yeah. It's interesting because we tend not to. Like, I'm noticing this with my own businesses, like I've added some new people along the way and, they're like waiting for someone else to do this one piece that could take them 1 second to do and the other person's not available. We need to get this thing out. But they're thinking, oh my God, it's my kindness. I am not going to step on anyone's toes if I do it. But for me, the businesses is the opposite of anything we've ever learned. It's you have green light. If you're here, I trust you already. Day one with me, I
Mm.
trust you already. Otherwise, I can't trust me for hiring you. So, like, green light, you know how to do it, go. And I love people are multitasking in the business. They have different capacities. And I keep asking them, what else would you like to learn? Because for me, it's not about one person, one thing, even though that could be their area that they choose that they want to play more with. But like, there's so much to the business. And if we're allowing what you just described, not only what you're going to do on these teams, but your willingness to now be that space to allow those possibilities, to allow someone else to know, hey, the minute they are about to go the competition way, hey, something else is available. May not be cognitive, but now you're inviting that space in their world. So I love that because if we go beyond what we were taught to go to what we know and what actually feels good inside with our bodies, like what else could we create?
Yeah. Well, and I think that was, if I had to distill like one thing, that was one of the greatest gifts with the Kennedy campaign is so I'm used to playing on these teams with consciousness where people are on their self-awareness journey, right? They're playing with tools,
Yeah.
they've been exploring modalities, they're asking questions, they're like in the messiness, awesomeness of all of it. And then I start getting on these volunteer meetings and all this stuff with the campaign. And it's all started with the local crew. And it was a very different group of people coming from all different places. Many of them did have experience specifically in politics, like creating campaigns and stuff. And that's a whole universe that I really knew nothing about. And then we had people who had no experience, but were moved by the movement. And so they were like, I'm in, I'm here, whatever it takes. And what I got to see, let's see if I can I can say this in a coherent way. My resume had no experience with what I was walking into. So there was like, I almost couldn't prove anything because I had nothing to pull on. Okay. But what I saw was that the questions that I asked, the way that I was with everyone, the willingness to lean in and speak and share something. And there were a couple times I led them on like energetic explorations and like mindset kind of stuff. It completely changed the way that everyone was able to be with each other. And so it was like, because I couldn't prove, the universe was like showing me my being rippling through. And it was such a gift because, especially in something like politics, where there's a lot of like, you're going for an outcome, it's really easy to just look at the doing and the milestones and the things that you're aiming for. But ironically, for me, it was everything was the opposite. It was that arena which showed me more of my being in the world in a way that I hadn't been willing to acknowledge yet.
Yeah. And what I love, because for me, I do have the pleasure of mixing and working with different people around the world who may or may not know the tools of access consciousness, working with communities and different players around the world. It is. And it's funny because sometimes we underestimate that, the value of it too. Because sometimes it is not about talking. It's actually about just relaxing and being there and observing and not willing to say something if it's going to create greater, but it's not the I have to be there, I have to say something because I have to prove something, and it yields so many ways. And even the Kennedy campaign or so many others, like, yeah, we're going towards a target, but guess what? Then there's right field, and then you go right, and then there's backfield, and there's left field, like it has this magic of changing and shifting every 10 seconds. So it is that willingness to know, hey, what's required here? Instead of what are my agendas and getting to that, particular um, outcome, which is so different. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, and yes, and yes to that.
Yeah.
Kate, where can people find you? I know we'll have in our show notes information where they can find you, but you bring such an awesome diversity of just different things. So, where's a good place for people to reach you?
Yeah, I think probably right in this 10 seconds, the easiest place to come and find me is Instagram, uh, kate.sarton.done. And I do also have a website and it's being updated. And so it's just my name, it's katesarton.com. But if you go there right now, because it's being updated, you'll get a funny thing. So those are probably the easiest ways to find me.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm so grateful for you. I've known you for a little while, and it's been beautiful to watch you as your journey has changed, like all the different ways that you're leading things and you're creating things. And I love your outlook on things, like even the moment where things were crunchy and, undefined and like the relaxation and how you could actually bring different people and different things together to make it even greater. So, thank
Mhm.
you. Thank you for you being you.
Thank you, Lolly.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. And remember, spread the seeds to whoever you think might this conversation might contribute to. And we'll see you guys on the next What Do You Know podcast. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for being here for this episode of What Do You Know podcast. We're so grateful you're here. If you have not yet subscribed, you can subscribe below. And will you contribute to assisting us in spreading this out to all others who may be looking for it? And comments below. Let us know. What did you think of this episode? What contribution has it been for you? And also, what topics would you like to hear about? We look forward to hearing from you today and in the future.